They'd been friends for as long as I'd known Ethan. It was inevitable, really. They'd always gotten along well, almost too well if I'm being honest. I never thought much of it, though. I mean, it was Lily. She was my sister, my best friend. What could possibly go wrong? It was at my birthday party that I started to feel the uncomfortable shift. Ethan had been quiet the whole evening, distant, his attention divided. Lily, however, was radiant. She kept everyone engaged with her stories, always with a mischievous grin on her face. She was the life of the party, and Ethan? He'd just stand by her side, leaning in a little too much, laughing a little too hard at her jokes. That night, after the guests had left and the house settled into its usual quiet, I asked Ethan if everything was okay. He brushed it off, saying he was just tired, that work had been stressful. But I felt it, the space between us, the distance growing. The days after that only made things worse. Ethan would spend more and more time at the office, claiming to be working late. He'd come home late, always with a story about how the team had to finish up some project or how the client had changed plans at the last minute. I told myself it was all just a coincidence, that I was imagining things. But then it happened. I was going through my closet, trying to find something to wear for a work event when I found a pair of earrings. They weren't mine. They were delicate, silver with tiny blue gemstones. I knew they weren't Lily's either. Lily had a more extravagant taste in jewelry. These were understated, elegant. And then it hit me. They were the exact kind of earrings I had once admired at a boutique we passed by during our anniversary trip last year. My heart dropped. I didn't confront him immediately. I told myself that it was probably nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I spent the next few days observing Ethan, watching his every move, listening to his words more carefully, and each time I felt more certain. Then came the night that shattered everything. I had been staying up later than usual, trying to finish up some work, when I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing softly. It was just after midnight. I peered through the living room window, and there they were, Ethan and Lily, standing by the car in our driveway. They were laughing, their faces close together, and for a moment I could almost feel the tension in the air, the way they moved with an intimacy that didn't belong to siblings. My blood ran cold. I stayed in the shadows, not wanting them to see me. I watched them linger there for a while, talking in low voices. And then, without warning, Ethan kissed her. Kiss so intimate, so full of longing that it made my stomach churn. I couldn't breathe. My body went cold, like I was frozen in place. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally came back to my senses, I knew what I had to do. I quietly closed the window and retreated to the bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling as if my world was crumbling around me. The next day, I confronted him. I didn't yell. I didn't demand answers. I just asked quietly if he'd been seeing her. There was something going on. He tried to deny it, of course. He told me I was overreacting, that nothing was happening between them. But the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. He fumbled over his words, unable to look at me for more than a few seconds at a time. In that moment, I realized how little he cared for me anymore. And how much he cared for her. It wasn't the first time I'd suspected something. There had always been little moments, little signs, but I'd pushed them aside. I'd wanted to believe that Ethan was faithful, that our love was strong enough to withstand anything. But now, in the quiet of our bedroom, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. My husband had fallen in love with my sister. And my sister, with her carefree beauty and effortless charm, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay. That night, we barely spoke. He left for work the next morning, but I didn't ask him where he was going. I didn't care. It was Lily who came to me first, just a few days later. She came to apologize, but it wasn't the apology I expected. It wasn't one of guilt or sorrow. Instead, it was the kind of apology that made it clear she didn't truly understand the pain she'd caused me. She didn't feel bad about what had happened. She only felt bad about getting caught. "I never meant for this to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. But I could see it in her eyes. The regret wasn't for what she'd done. It was for the mess that had been created. And that's when I realized Ethan wasn't the only one who had betrayed me. So had Lily. I didn't tell her what was really on my mind. I didn't tell her how much it hurt to think that the one person I had trusted most in the world was the one who had taken away the one thing that mattered to me, my family, my home, my sense of self. Instead, I just nodded, my heart heavy with a bitterness I couldn't escape. "I need time," I told her. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and left. But nothing was ever the same again. The days passed in a blur of silence, of awkward conversations with Ethan, of pretending that things were normal when they were anything but. I spent more time alone, just trying to breathe, trying to find the person I used to be before all this. I wondered how I could ever go back to being the woman I was before I found out that my sister had taken my husband from me, piece by piece. And Ethan? He seemed to think that time would heal everything. He apologized, of course. He told me he loved me, that it was a mistake, that he regretted everything. But I could see through the lies. He had already made his choice. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I could ever forgive either of them. But one thing was certain, I could never unsee what I had seen, never unknow the truth that had broken me. And so, as I stood there, looking at the empty space between us, I realized that sometimes love isn't enough. And sometimes the hardest thing of all is learning to walk away from the people you thought you could trust the most. Because in the end, the heart doesn't lie. It knows when it's been shattered, even if the pieces can never be put back together.